As all of you know, Saturn and Pluto conjuncted on January 12th, 2020. Now, within hours of the exact conjunction, maybe about 2 hours before, a volcano exploded in the Philippines, the Taal volcano. And this is an image of it that was taken by two people who put it on their blog. It's pretty impressive. And they also, what really struck me about this is that they also showed images within hours the next day of dust everywhere and masks. They had to go out in masks because the dust that was falling out of the sky was actually sulfuric and there were toxic fumes. Now, we know that the Saturn-Pluto cycle, which I'm going to look at in some detail today, has to do with the breaking down of the structures in the world that as we have known them. It means that what certain things have outlived their time and they're going to go whether we want them to or not. There's usually the cosmos manifests in events that are outside our control, but not uniquely. And some Saturn-Pluto cycles are gentler than others. But one of the things I noticed thinking about this particular conjunction, which as we all know is in Capricorn, is the contaminated air. On January 3rd, there was a drone strike in Iran that killed a general that nearly set off a war between Iran and the United States. I mean, where we are now, we've practically forgotten that. You may not even have noticed this volcano. And on January 11th, I flew to Australia, where we were in a kind of emotional Armageddon. And while I was in Australia, the smoke kind of came into Melbourne, and you literally could not go out. There were warnings that said, stay inside, don't go out, don't breathe the air. During that, for one of those days, Melbourne was the most polluted city on the planet. And then, of course, now we're all told, don't go outside, wear a mask, don't breathe in the air. So we're in a very similar kind of things are coming out of the sky. Now, I certainly don't associate Capricorn with the sky. However, one of the reflections that I made, I wanted to show you the chart for the Saturn-Pluto conjunction. And one of the reflections I made looking at this, I've set this for Paris because this is where I live, is how little air there is in this chart. There is one planet, Venus in Aquarius, but Venus is essentially unaspected, unless there's an aspect that David can immediately tell me about, which there may be. And the moon is not particularly well aspected. It has no classical aspects. It's quincunx to Neptune. And during this time, a few days later, there was no error in this chart because Venus would have moved into Pisces. Now, and actually, it's only until Friday, 2 days ago, that we've had more than 2 planets in air for any amount of time. Venus, we now have Venus, Mars, and Saturn. So I was thinking about Capricorn in some ways as the 12th house of Aquarius, and as the sign that precedes the sign where we will be taking a new breath in December. But for the moment, everything that's come before has come up in such a way that we cannot, that our exchanges, the lack, we cannot trust the world or the environment that we live in. And I think many astrologers had talked about this particular Saturn-Pluto cycle as a possible environmental crisis. But I don't know many people who actually predicted it would take this form, in fact. I think I know one, Andre Barbault, who wrote in 2011, and I'll show you that quote a little later today, but he wrote in 2011 that 2020 and 2021 could be the beginning of a new pandemic. Now, where did he get that from? Certainly, pandemics are not necessary. If you go back in history, they're not necessarily signified by Saturn Pluto. They can be because the SARS epidemic of 2003 came when Saturn and Pluto were still in opposition, and certainly the AIDS epidemic in the 80s began under the first cases, not the full-fledged epidemic, but the first cases also began with Saturn Pluto. But going through the history of epidemics, this isn't always the signature. The flu in World War I, at the end of World War I in 1918, began with Saturn, Neptune, and was expanded on by Jupiter, Pluto.